I want you to start this deep dive by visualizing something with me. It's a very specific image, so close your eyes if you can. Imagine you're hiking. You've decided to take a weekend trip, maybe to a national park out in Washington State, or just a quiet, dense patch of woods off a highway in New York.
Yeah, just somewhere completely out of the way.
Right. The air is crisp, the ground is uneven, covered in damp, decaying leaves. And you step off the trail for a moment to tie your shoe or maybe take a photo, and your boot hits something hard. Thud. You look down, brush away the dirt and pine needles, and you see the rim of a bucket.
Just a standard, bright, orange Home Depot bucket. The kind you probably have, sitting in your garage right now holding car wash supplies.
Exactly. A totally mundane object. And if you found that out in the wild, your brain immediately categorizes it as trash. You think, construction debris, or someone was just too lazy to haul this to the dump. You probably wouldn't even touch it.
Right. It's invisible because it's so ordinary.
But in the reality we are exploring today, let's say curiosity gets the better of you. You pry off that plastic lid, and inside, sealed tight against the rain and the soil, you don't find trash. You find a handgun wrapped in plastic. You find a thick wad of cash. You find a coil of zip ties, a box of ammunition, and a roll of duct tape.
And I think the most chilling detail isn't just the weapons themselves, it's the timeline. That bucket might have been buried there 3 years ago, just sitting in the dark under the earth, waiting.
Waiting for a crime that hadn't even been planned yet. That is the nightmare scenario we are stepping into today. We're doing a deep dive into the mind of Israel Keyes. And I have to say, looking at the profile titled The Methodical Shadow that we're using as our source today, this is absolutely not your typical true crime story.
No, it really isn't. It challenges the foundational logic of criminal profiling. Usually when we analyze violent offenders, we look for impulse control issues or a very specific type of victim that fulfills a fantasy. We look for a pattern. Keyes was completely different.
Yeah, the sources describe him as a methodical shadow.
And that is a terrifyingly accurate label. He brings up this question that law enforcement struggles to answer. I mean, how do you catch a predator who has no pattern?
That's our mission for this deep dive. We aren't just recounting crimes here. We're trying to unpack the system. We need to understand how he operated, how he managed to stay off the radar for over a decade, and honestly, the sheer level of patience involved.
Right.
It's the deferred gratification that I find so hard to wrap my head around. Most criminals seem to act on an urge right now. Keyes was willing to wait years.
That patience is the outlier trait. It's what makes him so dangerous. And to understand that patience, you have to look at or at least the very effective mask he wore. Because if you met Israel Keyes on the street in 2010, you wouldn't have crossed to the other side. You probably would have shaken his hand or hired him to do a job.
That's the part that is so disquieting. He wasn't lurking in the shadows in the traditional cinematic sense. He was living a seeming normal life. The sources place him in Washington State and later in Anchorage, Alaska. He wasn't unemployed. He ran his own construction business. He even served in the U.S. Army.
Which is the perfect camouflage, if you think about it. He was a handyman, a contractor. He was the guy you hired to fix the deck or renovate the bathroom. He blended in because his job required him to have tools, to drive a truck, to be in and out of people's spaces.
Right. Nobody questions the guy with the tool belt.
Exactly. Unlike a lot of serial offenders who live on the fringes because they are too socially dysfunctional to hold a job, Keyes functioned highly. He wasn't a drifter, he was a neighbor.
A neighbor with a very dark secret. But we know that normal was just a veneer. When we dig into the background provided in the source material, specifically his upbringing, the picture gets a lot darker. He was born in Cove, Utah in 1978, but this wasn't a standard suburban childhood with Little League and PTA meetings.
Far from it. The source describes a very strict, isolated upbringing. The family eventually moved to Washington State, but the lifestyle remained consistent. Off-grid, limited social interaction, homeschooling. Now, I want to be clear here. Isolation or homeschooling does not make someone a criminal. Plenty of people grow up that way and are perfectly well-adjusted.
Right. We absolutely don't want to draw a false causation there. But in Keyes' case, looking at the retrospective analysis, that isolation seemed to create a petri dish where certain dark tendencies could grow without anyone noticing.
Yes.
The source mentions the classic McDonald triad indicators, specifically cruelty to animals.
Exactly. It's that combination of high intelligence and deep emotional detachment. The profile highlights this specific danger. He was smart enough to understand social norms, he knew how to act like a person, but he felt absolutely no connection to those norms.
He just mimicked them.
Right, he viewed them as rules for other people. And here's where it gets really interesting, or rather terrifying, from a law enforcement perspective. Usually by the time someone escalates to serial murder, they have a rap sheet. You expect a paper trail, burglary, assault, petty theft, maybe some domestic disturbance calls. You expect to see them failing at life and acting out, getting caught for smaller things as they ramp up.
It's the escalation ladder. You don't just wake up one day and become a master criminal.
Precisely. But Keyes didn't have that. He avoided a significant criminal record before the murders. He realized early on that to do what he wanted to do, the real work, as he might have seen it, he had to appear completely unremarkable. He treated his legitimate life, his construction work, his family life, as a cover story.
It's like he was a spy, but a spy for his own private war against society. And that real work brings us back to those buckets I mentioned at the start, the kill kits. This is the part of the deep dive that really stuck with me. I've read about a lot of cases, and usually the killer brings the weapon with them, or they use something opportunistic at the scene. This is logistics. This is supply chain management.
It's the defining characteristic of his modus operandi. Most killers operate on impulse or convenience. Keyes operated on logistics. The source details exactly what was in those kits. We mentioned guns and zip ties, but the kits also included items like Drano and shovels.
The Drano is a horrific detail. That's not for the killing, that's for the aftermath. It implies he was thinking about the forensic countermeasures, destroying DNA, accelerating decomposition, before he'd even met the victim.
Precisely. He was thinking about the cleanup before the crime occurred. And the timeline is what makes it unique. He would travel to a random state, bury a kit in a secluded spot, and then just leave. He might not return to that spot for years.
Years. I'm trying to imagine the psychology of that. You bury a gun in a bucket in New York, fly back to Alaska, go to work, fix someone's roof, play with your daughter, all while knowing that bucket is sitting there waiting for you like a buried treasure chest of violence.
It speaks to a profound level of compartmentalization and delayed gratification. He wasn't just looking for a quick thrill. He was cultivating a long-term project. It's almost like a hobbyist collecting gear for a trip they plan to take someday. Except the trip is murder. And his travel strategy was designed to shatter any link between him and the victim.
Let's break that travel strategy down, because this is why he was invisible for so long. The source calls him a ghost. How did he actually pull that off in the modern age?
Well, living in Alaska gave him a natural buffer. It's isolated. But his process was rigorous. He would fly into a major city, rent a car, and then drive hundreds of miles away from the airport.
So purely hypothetically, he flies into Chicago, rents a Ford Focus, but then drives to a small town in Indiana or Ohio to commit the crime.
Exactly. And crucially, he wouldn't target someone he knew. He wouldn't target someone he'd been stalking online. He would arrive in that random town and select a victim of opportunity.
That breaks the investigation immediately. Stranger-on-stranger crime is already the hardest to solve because there is no motive, no relationship. But usually you can look at cell tower data or rental car records near the scene.
But if he rented the car 3 states away, and he left his phone in the hotel room or turned it off, he was a ghost because he was never technically there in the eyes of the data algorithms police use. He understood that police look for connections, so he made sure there were none.
It's chilling because the source suggests he enjoyed the planning more than the act itself. It was like a game of chess against society, and he was winning because he was the only one who knew the game was being played.
That's a key insight. For Keyes, the murder was the conclusion, but the hunt and the organization were the main event. He derived satisfaction from knowing he was smarter than the collective intelligence of the FBI.
So let's talk about the people who unfortunately crossed his path. The source specifically mentions the Curriers in 2011. This was in Essex, Vermont.
Bill and Lorraine Currier. This case is heartbreaking, but from an analytical standpoint, it demonstrates the terrifying effectiveness of his disposal methods. He flew into Chicago again, hundreds of miles away, rented the car, and drove all the way to Vermont. He broke into their home in a classic home invasion scenario.
And this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. He wasn't looking for jewelry.
No, he abducted them, took them to an abandoned farmhouse he had scouted previously, and killed them separately. And here's the brutal reality. To this day, their bodies have never been found.
That is the part that hits hard. He was so efficient with those kits, the Drano, the shovels, that he completely erased them. It's a testament to how effective his no-connection strategy was. The police in Vermont had absolutely no reason to look for a construction worker from Alaska who had flown into Illinois.
Exactly. If he hadn't confessed later, that case might still be entirely cold. They might still be listed as missing persons.
But then we get to 2012. Samantha Koenig. This seems to be the turning point in the story. It feels like a shift in his psychology, or maybe a crack in the armor.
It is a massive shift. Samantha was 18 years old, working at a coffee stand in Anchorage, Alaska. Keyes kidnapped her in February 2012. Now notice the difference immediately.
He's in Alaska, he's on his home turf. He broke his own golden rule of, well, don't hunt where you live, essentially.
He did. He usually traveled thousands of miles to create that buffer. This time, he struck close to home. Psychologists debate why. Maybe he was decompensating, maybe the urge became too strong to suppress during the winter months when construction work is slow and he couldn't travel, but that complacency led to mistakes.
The source mentions a ransom strategy here that is it's truly disturbing. It goes beyond just murder into psychological torture of the family.
It is difficult to discuss, but it's crucial to understanding his cruelty. After he had already killed Samantha, he kept her body. Weeks later, he returned and attempted to stage the crime to make it look like she was still alive. He wanted to export ransom money from her family. This involved...
Are her eyelids open?
Yes. Sewing her eyelids open to take a photo with a current newspaper to provide proof of life.
That is just pure evil. It's not just about the killing, it's about manipulating the hope of the parents, making them believe she's still there when she isn't.
It's horrific. But that cruelty was also his undoing. He demanded the ransom be paid to a debit card. And then he made the fatal error. He took that debit card and started using it.
This is the part I don't get. The guy is a genius of logistics. He buries kits for years. He drives across state lines to avoid detection. Why does he suddenly start using a traceable debit card?
It's the paradox of the serial killer. Narcissism eventually overrides caution. He felt superior. He thought he could outsmart the tracking, or perhaps he just stopped caring as much. He went on a trip through the American Southwest, and every time he used that card to withdraw cash, he left a digital footprint. For a man who had spent a decade being a ghost, he suddenly lit up the grid.
So the methodical shadow finally stepped into the light.
And the authorities were waiting. The source details that the FBI and local police were tracking the withdrawals in real time. They were literally watching the dots connect on the map. He was finally arrested in a parking lot in Lufkin, Texas in March 2012.
So they catch him. They've got him in a room. I imagine they think they've just caught a guy who killed a coffee shop worker in Anchorage. That's a big crime, sure, but then the interrogation starts and the scope just explodes.
That's exactly what happened. They start talking to him, expecting a specific confession about Samantha, and Keyes starts dropping hints. He admits to the Curriers in Vermont, which shocked them because there was no link. But then he starts alluding to more. He hinted at 8, maybe 11 victims.
8 to 11. But listening to the experts in the source material, some people think it's higher.
It's very possible. You have to remember, he'd been doing this for over a decade. We only know about the ones he chose to talk about. And this brings us to his personality during those interrogations. It's a fascinating contrast to someone like Ted Bundy.
Right. Bundy is the archetype everyone knows. He loved the cameras. He represented himself in court. He wanted the Netflix special, essentially, before Netflix existed.
Bundy was a narcissist who wanted to be famous. Keyes was a narcissist who wanted to be superior. He didn't want his face on the news. He explicitly told investigators that he avoided killing in the same area twice, specifically to prevent a pattern from emerging. He didn't want a cool nickname in the press. He wanted to win. He wanted to own the information.
Well, it's a power play. I know something you don't know.
Exactly. He traded information for small comforts, cigars, coffee, a specific candy bar. He was rationing out his secrets. He was still trying to control the narrative, even in handcuffs.
And in a way, he tried to secure that win right to the end, December 2, 2012.
Yes. While awaiting trial in his jail cell in Anchorage, Israel Keyes died by suicide.
And he didn't just leave a note. He left a scene.
He did. He slit his wrist and strangled himself. But under his body, they found a drawing of a skull made in his own blood. And a cryptic poem. It was dramatic, yes, almost theatrical, but analytically, it was the ultimate act of control.
How so? Because to me, it looks like a desperate exit.
Think about what suicide achieves in this context. By killing himself, he shut the door. He prevented a full confession. He prevented the families from facing him in court and telling him what they thought of him. He robbed the prosecutors of a verdict. And most painfully, he prevented the recovery of any other victims. He took the map to the bodies with him.
That's the tragedy here, the loss of answers. We know about the Curriers and Samantha, but those other numbers, 8 to 11, those represent real people, real families waiting for answers that Keyes took to the grave.
And that is why this case lingers. That's why we're doing a deep dive on it over a decade later. It's the what-ifs.
It really is the lingering shadows. Why does this case haunt us so much? Is it just the randomness?
I think it's the violation of our safety logic. We tell ourselves stories to feel safe. If I don't go to dangerous neighborhoods at night, I'm safe. Or if I don't associate with dangerous people, I'm safe. Keyes prove that you could be sitting in your own home in Vermont watching TV or at your job in a coffee stand, and a man who flew in from Alaska, specifically to find someone anyone could find you.
It removes the illusion of control. It turns safety into a lottery.
Completely. And then there are the practical unanswered questions. The FBI is still analyzing his travel history. They're looking at his rental car records, his flight logs, and trying to overlay them with missing persons cases from the 2000s.
Because there's a gap, right? The source mentions investigators are looking for earlier crimes.
There is a strong suspicion that he didn't just start with the Curriers. The level of sophistication he showed implies practice. You don't usually start with a perfect cross-country murder kit strategy. You build up to it. So where are the earlier mistakes? Where are the bodies from the learning curve?
It's unnerving to think that there are cold cases out there right now, maybe in Washington State, maybe in Texas, maybe on the East Coast, that are actually Keyes victims, and we just haven't connected the dots yet.
It is highly probable. And that is the legacy he left. Not a legacy of fame, which he claimed he didn't want, but a legacy of uncertainty, a puzzle with missing pieces that may never be found.
So what does this all mean for us? We've unpacked the mask, the kits, the victims, and the suicide. It's a heady story to sit with.
It is. I think the takeaway is realizing that outliers exist. Criminal profiling is based on data, on what most criminals do. Keyes reminds us that there will always be someone who studies the system just to beat it. He treated murder like a logistical project, devoid of emotion, purely strategic. It challenges law enforcement to look beyond the obvious patterns. It forces us to realize that no pattern is in itself a pattern.
It really shakes you up. You know, we started this deep dive with that image of the bucket in the woods, and I think that's where I want to leave our listeners today. Final provocative thought to chew on. We know Keyes buried these kill kits years in advance. We know he traveled extensively. And we know he only told the FBI about the ones that were convenient for him to reveal or the ones they already knew about.
Right. He gave up the ones he had to, or the ones that gave him leverage for those cigars.
So if he was this methodical and he buried these kits all over the country, logic implies there is a surplus.
It certainly does. He likely didn't use all the inventory he prepared.
Is it possible that right now, somewhere in a forest you might hike through this weekend or a park you might visit with your kids, there is still a Home Depot bucket buried a few feet down, packed with guns, cash, and zip ties, waiting for a killer who is never coming back to claim it?
That is a chilling thought. But given what we know about Israel Keyes, it is entirely possible. The artifacts of his hate are likely still out there, just beneath the surface.
On that note, stay safe out there. Thanks for listening to this deep dive.
Take care.